Good afternoon and welcome to today's webinar with Oxford Cannabinoid Technologies.
Alex, thank you very much. And ladies and gentlemen, thank you all very, very much for attending today. As Alex says, my name is Neil Mahapatra. I'm the co-founder and executive chairman of Oxford Cannabinoid Technologies, OCT. And this is our presentation for the Yellowstone webinar. And we look forward to giving you this presentation and also answering the questions that you have over the course of this next hour. I'm accompanied on this webinar by Dr. John Lucas, the CEO of the business, and you will hear from him very shortly in a few slides' time. So just to begin at this front page, this summary slide, who are we and what is OCT? So we are a cannabis company, but very much in the model of the next GW Pharmaceuticals. And there's a page right after this that explains exactly what that means. But we are a next generation cannabis company that is working with cannabis and cannabinoids to develop prescription drugs for the pain market, which is estimated to be over 40 billion pounds. We have recently raised 16 million pounds gross at IPO, and use of proceeds is to take 4 of our drug development programs significantly further in development, and the lead 2 into clinical trials through to the end of phase 1 clinical trials. We have an extremely strong research network of both commercial partners and academic partners, in particular the University of Oxford, and there's a page later on that talks about how we developed our relationship with them. And our team is really strong in the space, and I think a clear differentiator versus some of the other cannabis companies that are either on the market or coming to the market. And we're very unique in that we, even before IPO, have a FTSE 100 Imperial Brands, a FTSE 100 company in our shareholder base already. And just to finish on this page, so we did raise 16.5 million pounds at IPO, and we very much think of ourselves as the next GW Pharmaceuticals. We are one of, I think, 2 other firms that operate in the same business model as GW, and this is a business. GW was sold for over $7 billion about three months ago, and that really shows the type of value that can be achieved through following the business model that we do, and also gives you a sense of where we, OCT, hope to get to in both the medium and the long term. So the next slide talks about, why we think of ourselves as the next GW Pharmaceuticals. There were 2 business models that we could have chosen when we set up OCT. The first is the unlicensed medicines business model, and which is the vast majority of medical cannabis firms. And the second is the licensed medicines business model, otherwise known as prescription medicines, the type of medicine you pick up from a pharmacy once you've received a prescription from a doctor. We very much feel that the unlicensed medicines route has a range of issues associated with it. There's a lack of standardization with regards to dosage, for example. No one batch of cannabis is the same. It has a different profile of cannabinoids and associated molecules in. There's also a lack of standardization with regards to quality. You can't guarantee that each batch of cannabis has the right level of disinfectants or other things from batch to batch. And for those reasons and others, and certainly something that we're seeing both in the UK and internationally, the medical community really struggles to get behind unlicensed medicines in real volume. And so what that means in the UK is that the NHS won't fund them. And in the US, it means that insurance companies won't reimburse unlicensed medicines. The licensed medicines route, the prescription medicines route, the pharmaceutical route is very different. And to be clear, we're absolutely a cannabis firm, but we work in these existing channels of pharmaceutical development, so phase 1, phase 2, phase 3 clinical trials, and then regulatory approval at the end. And these channels have been around for decades. They're channels that the medical community already understands and expects to see when drugs are taken through development. And for those reasons, we have chosen to focus OCT on working with cannabinoids, but taking cannabis and our drug development through these channels. And that leads ultimately doctors to have confidence that they can prescribe our products with real volume and real certainty. And also that means here the NHS will fund them, and internationally insurance companies will reimburse them. And the example of GW really shows the value that can be achieved by taking this very specific route. GW, for its lead indications and lead products, has taken cannabis oil, which arguably is the type of cannabis oil that you could buy from Holland & Barrett under a different brand. But they've taken them through these existing channels of pharmaceutical development, so phase 1, phase 2, phase 3 clinical trials. And now they're selling, I think in their last annual results, they're selling $500 million worth of cannabis oil per year for their lead indications. And that really shows the type of value that can be captured when you work through these existing channels of pharmaceutical developments and target and work within the production of licensed medicines. And that's a really important point that if there's one take home to get across from today and this afternoon session, it is that there's huge value that can be achieved by going through these licensed medicines routes, and that's why we think of ourselves as the next GW Pharmaceuticals. So the next slide shows where we've come from, a bit of our history, and then the red dotted line was the IPO and what we're doing post IPO. So we were created in March 2017 after nearly 1.5 years worth of discussions with Oxford University, and we'll talk about them a few slides later. In February 2018, we began development of our proprietary library of cannabinoid derivatives. And what that means specifically is that we extracted cannabinoids from the plant, and then using medicinal chemistry techniques, we changed their structure slightly. And we did that for two reasons. The first is by changing the structure of cannabinoids, you can make them slightly more effective. You can get them to cross cell membranes more easily. You can get them to be absorbed into different tissues more effectively. But the second reason, arguably the more important reason, is that by changing the structure of cannabinoids, even just slightly, you can then patent them. You can put composition of matter, structural, intellectual property around them. If something's a natural product and you don't change its structure versus the structure in which you find it in nature, you cannot put IP around it, and you cannot put a composition of matter patent around it. But by changing the structure, you can then put IP and a patent around it. In other words, by creating this library of cannabinoid derivatives, where we've changed the structure, we've created this future bedrock of drug compounds, which when they show results and efficacy in testing with our partners, such as Oxford, we can very quickly put intellectual property around them. In August 2018, we closed an institutional round of private investments from Imperial Brands, the FTSE 100 company, and also Casa Verde Capital, a Los Angeles-based private equity firm. And in September 2019, we in-licensed our lead drug development compound, OCT 461201, which John will talk about a few slides later, and why we think this has real blockbuster potential, and why on this compound alone, it can make OCT a unicorn. In 2020 and through 2020, we carried on developing our library of proprietary cannabinoid derivatives. And in April 2020, we were published along with one of our Oxford research professors in the respected scientific journal Pain. We then carried on developing our lead two drug development programs, 461201 and our phytocannabinoid mixture on a preclinical basis. And Now that we've IPO'd, we will finish off preclinical development of those 2 programs and then look to enter phase 1 clinical trials next year. Those will finish in Q1 2023, and in Q2 2023, we will look to enter phase 2 clinical trials. So that's the roadmap for where we've come from and where we hope to go in the next couple of years. And the team to get us there, I think, is a real differentiator for us versus many of the other cannabis companies that you'll see in the market. It's an extremely experienced and high quality team. They're led by Dr. John Lucas, our Chief Executive Officer, as well as John being a trained molecular geneticist. He's also a qualified lawyer. And I think that's really important when you are working with cannabis and cannabinoids, having an appreciation right at the top of the organization for the legal landscape in which you're operating in is very helpful. He's accompanied by Clarissa Suamimo-Coker, the COO and General Counsel of OCT. Clarissa works with John on company strategy and focuses a lot on internal management. And as our General Counsel, is also responsible for ensuring that our home office licenses are renewed every year to handle controlled substances and cannabis as they need to be. Karen Lowe is our very experienced CFO, our finance director. She's a qualified accountant at Mazars and has over 2 decades experience in audit and risk management. And Dr. Valentino Paravicini is our Chief Scientific Officer, our superstar CSO, who's got over 2 decades in scientific research, but over a decade of which was in large cap pharma, and nearly 8 years of which was at Glaxo. And so this is the team that is in place, not just for the next couple of years, but for the next 10 years, as we look to replicate the heady heights of achievement and I hope a valuation of a GW Pharmaceuticals. And they're accompanied by a very institutional quality board. I won't spend too much time on this slide. The left-hand side I've just described, myself on the top left, and then the management team that we've just talked about. And on the right-hand side, my co-founder, Gavin Satyanathan, is a director of the business. And Bish Mukherjee is the Imperial Brands representative. And having them on the board, and they've been on the board since they invested with us in 2018, having them involved has really helped ensure that we've done everything, not just to satisfactory standards, but to those high reporting standards necessary for a FTSE 100 company. And they're complemented by 2 independent non-execs. Cheryl Dylan is the very seasoned pharmaceutical independent NED. She has nearly 3 decades experience working in pharma in both Asia and Europe. And Judy Pomeroy is our experienced finance independent NED who chairs our remuneration and audit committee. I won't spend any more time on this slide. Suffice to say, I think there's a real diversity of experience there, which I think stands the company in really good stead going forward. So you'll hear from me a few slides later, but I'll hand over to John now, our CEO, who'll talk more about the problem that we're trying to solve, how we're doing it, and why we think this is a massive opportunity for us that could turn us into a unicorn. John. John, I think you might be on mute.
No, yeah. The problem that we're addressing at OCT is the lack of safe and effective drug products for treating chronic and severe pain. And this has led to the use and overuse of opioids for indications where they're not well suited. And that is why we're in the midst of an opioid crisis today. 50% of the medical cannabis market is directed to pain or a painful condition. And that tells us that cannabinoids are safe and effective at treating pain. The pie chart in the bottom right shows the total addressable market for cannabinoids broken down into the types of pain that cannabinoids can treat, those pain segments. And this adds up to over a 40 billion market that's growing rapidly. Now, one of the problems with medical cannabis is that doctors in the US can't prescribe it by law, and they're reluctant to recommend it. In the UK, some specialists can prescribe medical cannabis in limited situations, but again, they're very reluctant to do so. And this is for good reason. You see, medical cannabis shifts the burden that would normally be the responsibility of the manufacturer to the physician and ultimately to the patient. With no oversight from a medicines regulatory agency like FDA or MHRA, physicians must take on the responsibility that this unapproved, unlicensed product is both safe and effective and produced in a quality and dose consistent manner. Understandably, most physicians are not willing to take on this personal liability. And this is what medical cannabis is up against, and it's what we at OCT are using to our advantage. You see, we're pushing on an open door. The regulatory agencies fully support our approach. For example, you can see a quote in the bottom left from FDA where they've stated publicly, "It is critical that FDA continues to do what we can to support the science needed to develop new drugs from cannabis." So the opportunity lies before us. And if you believe that cannabinoids are safe and effective at treating pain, then all we at OCT have to do is show it. And we will show it using randomized controlled clinical trials. Why? Because randomized controlled clinical trials is the only definitive way of demonstrating a drug product is both safe and effective. And it's the only path supported by FDA and other regulatory agencies. Without these trials, the FDA is not going to approve a drug product. And without FDA approval, as I said before, a physician cannot prescribe it. And without FDA approval, the patient's not going to be reimbursed. So the key here for OCT is this three-way relationship between doctor, patient, and insurer. And OCT is going to be a part of this by providing assurance to the doctor that the drug product is both safe and effective, and relief to the patient, relief from pain and financial relief in the form of reimbursement by the insurer. If we talk about how we build our pipeline, and how we will continue to do so in the near future or the foreseeable future. We develop three types of compounds. The first are natural phytocannabinoids. The advantage here is they're more likely to be safe and effective, and they have a very long and good history of use. The disadvantage is lack of patent protection. However, and this is a very important point, unlike medical cannabis, we, OCT, can obtain market exclusivity by pursuing orphan indications. This is the same approach that's adopted by GW and virtually every other large pharmaceutical company. There's over 6,000 orphan indications to choose from. And in return for developing a new medicine for one of these indications, the FDA grants the drug maker 7 years of market exclusivity. In Europe and Japan, the market exclusivity is 10 years. A second type of compound is where we take a phytocannabinoid and we chemically modify it. So it's a permanent modification. And this is what we refer to as a cannabinoid derivative. And we do this to improve its drug-like properties. So these compounds are superior to phytocannabinoids. A third type of compound is a cannabinoid memetic. This is the kind of compound that's developed by Big Pharma. These compounds act like highly potent and selective cannabinoids, but with very different chemical structures. And we also in-license compounds falling into one of these three categories. And what in-license allows us to do is advance our pipeline faster as they start further in development. If we talk about the screening and development of our drug candidates, when we formed OCT, we decided to use a virtual model to save on both time and cost to build out. And we have several partners, both academic and commercial. And the choice of partner, it depends on the type and the stage of research that we're doing. But very importantly, OCT owns all rights to the IP arising out of any of this research and development. If we now turn to monetization of our programs, each time we successfully pass a stage in development, we decrease our risk and increase the value of the program. And the increases along these value inflection points are nonlinear, with the greatest fold increases seen in the later stages of development. Our goal in developing our drug candidates is to commercialize our drug products directly. However, by reaching later stage value inflection points, we also position the company for acquisition or high value partnerships. Now at this point, I'd like to turn it back over to Neil to discuss our relationship with Oxford.
Thank you, John. And so this slide talks about how we developed our relationship with Oxford University. The luck was that I read the right subject there for my undergraduate degree. I read biology. And when the cannabis market was opening in 2015, particularly in North America, I went to see my old biology professor with the idea of designing a research partnership with Oxford to explore the medical potential of cannabis and cannabinoids. He was is a plant scientist specialist, and so saw the potential that something like this could have. And so then introduced me and my co-founder, Gavin Satyanathan, to members of the medical sciences department within the university. That then led to nearly 1.5 years worth of discussions with not just the scientists within medical sciences, but also members of the administrative wing of the university, who we had to demonstrate that doing something like this would have limited reputational impact. That culminated in us signing a research agreement, an umbrella research agreement with Oxford in 2017, nearly 1.5 years later. And then we very shortly after that set up and established OCT. I think the research agreement is truly unique and a real differentiator for us. All of the scientists there work exclusively with us on cannabis research and cannabinoid research, and we own the IP that is produced as a result of the research. So whilst it would be extremely difficult for any other company to work with Oxford, even if a similar type of company were to develop a relationship with a similar type of university, it would take nearly 1.5 years. So we think it's a real boon for us and a real differentiator for us, not just now, but also in the years to come. John.
Let's talk about our pipeline that we have currently. We have a well-differentiated pipeline that will not collapse in the event of, unfortunate event of a drug failure. And this offers significant downside protection. However, more importantly is the upside of our pipeline. So let's start with the first candidate. This is OCT 461201, our lead candidate. This is a cannabinoid memetic developed by a spin out of Pfizer. The compound is a highly potent and selective CB2 agonist, and it has no psychoactive properties. This is going to be a first-in-class compound for neuropathic pain and neuroinflammation. And the first indication that we're pursuing is postherpetic neuralgia. This is the pain condition arising from shingles. And we are pursuing postherpetic neuralgia because of the homogeneous nature of the patient population. And this reduces the risk of the risks associated with pain trials. The second indication that we're pursuing is visceral pain associated with irritable bowel syndrome, or IBS. The compound is currently in preclinical development. It has already demonstrated efficacy in 3 in vivo pain models and safety in 2 animal species of rats and dogs. We're developing OCT 461201 as a pill to be taken once or twice a day. And we aim to be in phase 1 clinical trials in Q3 of 2022, and advancing to phase 2 clinical trials in Q2 of 2023, which is the end of this funding round. The second candidate you see on the list here, where it says PCBs, that's our shorthand for phytocannabinoids. And because we're using phytocannabinoids, we don't expect any safety issues. We're pursuing orphan indications to obtain market exclusivity. The first orphan indication for this drug candidate is a pain condition that causes sudden excruciating pain. And the drug product will be administered to the lungs to decrease onset time and decrease liver metabolism. We aim to be in phase 1 clinical trials again in Q3 of 2022 and ready for phase 2 clinical trials in Q2 of 2023. I'll briefly go over our third and fourth program. The third program will screen and identify a compound from our proprietary library that is active and efficacious in a neuropathic pain model. And we aim to be ready for preclinical development at the end of this funding round in Q2 of 2023. And our fourth program is a program that will identify a first-in-class drug candidate targeting as of this time, an undisclosed receptor for commercial purposes. The drug candidate will have broad use in pain, inflammation, epilepsy, and cancer. If we take a look at the timelines, We expect the first drug approvals and commercializations to occur in 2027, followed soon thereafter by subsequent approvals. A key synergy of our product strategy is that we select drug candidates that can be repurposed across multiple indications. And this adds significant value to the drug candidate because by doing so, we don't have to repeat the early stages in development for the subsequent indications. We also have timelines for news flow. We'll be making regular announcements to the market to update investors on the status of our program. For example, over the next 3 to 6 months, we have our 2 lead programs, the 461201 and the PCBs. They're entering preclinical development, so we will announce when we're at each stage, and each time that we pass one of the milestones within preclinical development, we'll make that announcement to the market. The total addressable market is made up of those pain segments that cannabinoids can address that you saw on a previous slide. And initially, we're pursuing 2 of these segments, neuropathic pain and visceral pain, which make up the serviceable available market. The serviceable obtainable market refers to those indications that we're actually pursuing. Then the 1.55 billion on this slide that you see for the SOM is conservative approach. It represents only the first 2 candidates and 3 indications. And obviously, as the number of indications increase that we add to this and the drug candidates, this number will rise. I'd like to end this presentation with a question for our audience. The next time that you take a medicine or administer one to your child or loved one, I'd like for you to ask yourself, do I care whether this has gone through the rigors of clinical testing and is regulated by a medicines regulatory agency like MHRA? And I believe that your answer is going to explain why OCT is here. We hope you enjoyed the presentation, and we're happy to answer any of your questions.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Neil and John, thank you very much for that presentation. You've clearly been on quite an amazing journey over these last 5 years, and it probably tells us all that we should be nice to our professors at university because they can help us in our future business careers. So Neil, you obviously did the right thing when you were at Oxford there. I just want to remind people, if they would like to ask a question, there is a Q&A box at the bottom of the screen. Please type in your questions there, and we'll try and cover all questions now. We've had a few come in ahead of time, which we'll also take. So please, if you've got any questions, please type them in at the bottom of your screen. Some of these questions actually have been slightly answered already, but I think it's worth perhaps going through them as they have come up. I'm going to ask the first question here, which is, how unique is your relationship with Oxford University, and can anyone else replicate what you have with them?
John, would you mind if I took that one?
Please, Neil. Yes, absolutely.
So I think the answer to whether anybody could replicate it is no. Our relationship with Oxford is incredibly unique and born of several years of relationship with the university. Beside the contractual agreements that we have with Oxford, where all of the researchers work exclusively with us on cannabis, navigating that university requires some understanding of its rather anachronistic nature. And so I think our relationship is really special and very unique. It's also worth stressing that it's a fee-for-service arrangement, which is rare. Oxford have no royalties at the end, and they don't have an equity stake in the business. And I think we only managed to achieve that because we did things the right way and didn't rush it too much. These things do take time. But our relationship is really unique.
Okay, thank you. Who do you think your main competitors will be?
Sorry, John, go on.
Well, GW was obviously our #1 competitor. I mean, they're absorbed now into Jazz Pharmaceuticals, and Jazz Pharmaceuticals will be then, take the place of GW Pharma. There's another pharmaceutical company in the US called Corbus. They've had a recent setback, but they are taking a similar approach to OCT. So I would say, in terms of the cannabinoid companies, those would be our closest competitors.
Okay.
The other point I'd make to that is the medical potential of cannabis is vast. There's huge opportunity to help millions of people across a range of indications, and given that there's space in the cannabis market for actually many more companies that follow the same business model as us. We're focused on pain, GW and Jazz very much focused on the neurological conditions. And so whilst we have competition through pursuing the same business model, there's different indications that we're each following.
Yeah, that's a great point, Neil, because GW Pharma had switched to neurology, which we're not in, and Corbus is fibrosis, and we're focusing on pain. And I should add that, whenever we select an indication, part of the vetting process that it has to go through, obviously, is a commercial analysis. So there's the science that marries with the commercial analysis. And we do, make sure that there are not other competitors in the same space when we move into that. So we have, first mover advantage.
Okay, thank you. What sort of news flow can we expect over the next 6 months?
Well, we have the news flow in terms of, as I stated, for our programs that are in preclinical development, and we'll keep the investors abreast on what stage we are. And each time we pass one of the milestones, we'll announce that. We have the potential for publications coming out from Oxford University. We could announce a scientific advisory board. We're going to be presenting at various meetings as thought leaders in both the science with Valentino Pervicini, our CSO, and Neil, depending on the type of conference it is. Neil, did I forget anything there?
No, I mean, suffice to say that as a biotechnology company, we're very alive to the fact that we do need regular news flow, given that revenue is a few years, given that revenue is a few years out. And so in addition to the aspects that John's mentioned, there's also new team members joining at some stage, and other new initiatives that will all be announced with regularity over the next 12 and 24 months. A regular news flow schedule is something that we're very alive to, have fully worked up, and you should see the impact of that both in the near and the medium term.
Okay, thank you. Are there any further plans to attract more investors' attention to generate additional stock market demand? And if I could add something to that, do you have any plans? If there are any private investors listening now, could they read any research on the company?
So the route that we're taking to drive additional demand was, above and beyond, first and foremost, is to execute well and to announce that we are executing well, given that we have the money in the bank to do so. That aside, we will continue to do events such as this to continue to drive up investor demand. And with regards to research, all I would say is nothing's agreed as yet, but please do watch this space, because we are also very acutely aware that we do need research to follow us and start promoting the stock. Brilliant,
thank you. Comment here that there's been a growing investor interest in the potential of cannabis, not least on the LSE, where there have been a number of well-publicized IPOs. Can you explain why you believe the opportunity is greater from pharmaceutical drugs than it is from the recreational well-being route?
So I think the example of GW kind of shows what could be achieved. They're selling $500 million worth of cannabis oil per year, and this is, again, it's cannabis oil that, were it not taken through pharmaceutical routes, you could buy under a different brand from Holland and Barrett. It's cannabis oil. But by going through this rigorous channel of pharmaceutical development, that's where you get to this very protected and patent protected position for your drugs. And that's when doctors look at all of the data that you produce by going through these clinical trials and are then happy to describe in real volume. So the value at the end and why we think that we can become a unicorn is huge versus more recreational focused companies. So that's the first point. The second point I make is the opportunity for us to be sold to a pharmaceutical firm is also there. As we're developing our drugs, we're generating IP. We're taking these products through classic pharmaceutical development. A pharmaceutical company is not going to buy a medical cannabis company or a recreational company that operates in unlicensed medicines. They're not. But given the medical potential of cannabis, pharma is now starting to look at it, which makes us, now that GW has been bought, one of two companies that can really be acquired in the long term by a pharmaco. They're not going to buy a company that's operating in the unlicensed medicine segment. So again, I think the potential for real value is very significant for us.
If I could just elaborate on a few of those points there. So in terms of, out-competing medical cannabis, the first thing and that we've discussed is market exclusivity. Medical cannabis is generic. There's no marketing around it. All the products are the same, and they don't have market exclusivity. And because of either orphan indications or for our derivatives and memetics, we have patent protection. We will have long-term market exclusivity. We're going to be the only player on the market, and you always get a bigger market share that way. The second thing is price. If you look at for example, if we take Epidiolex, which is GW Pharma's CBD oil, it costs about $30,000 to $35,000 a year for it. So that's how much they sell that for. So your price point is much higher. And then you really open up the market. If you take the US, which is by far the biggest market, physicians can't prescribe it. So how can you have an effective marketing strategy when the person who needs to prescribe the medicine is not even able to do so? So you really have to be a licensed medicine to capture the healthcare market in the US.
And just a reminder, if you do want to ask a question, please type them into the chat box at the bottom of your screen. Coming up with another one here. Have any cannabinoids received approval from the FDA?
Yes. There's Sativex or Sativex. That is a combination of THC, CBD. Well, that's approved in Europe. It's not approved yet in the United States. Epidiolex was the first phytocannabinoid. That's where it's actually produced from the plant. That was approved in the United States, and it's also approved in Europe. However, several years ago, THC, a synthetic form of THC, was approved in the United States as a drug called dronabinol for nausea and vomiting, chemotherapy-induced nausea and vomiting.
Okay, thank you. Question here, how much certainty is there regarding the costs of the later phase, I guess phase 1, phase 2, phase 3 trials, and what might cause any cost surprises?
I think we have a good handle on what they will cost in terms of what kind of surprises. Oh, well, okay, the kind of surprises that we would get is, you have your meetings with FDA or the regulatory agencies, and they may say, you need to do another arm, you need to have a larger cohort of patients, some sort of control, maybe your endpoint that you thought you were going to use will be changed. But the way we mitigate and avoid those types of surprises is that we're having meetings very early with the regulatory agencies. We're having them, we're scheduling them up now. So there's not going to be a surprise, and we'll keep going back to them. One of the advantages of an orphan indication approach, which we're taking with phytocannabinoids, is that the regulatory agencies provide free scientific advice. That is, they basically tell you the plan. You do this. This is what you take the plan to them, but they really work with you on it, so you know very well if you meet those endpoints that you're going to get approval.
Okay, thank you. Question here about the share price. Why do you think the shares have gone to a discount from the IPO placing price?
I think the answer to that is that there were some early shareholders in the business who invested when we set up the company in 2017, looking for some liquidity, and that's led to a slight drop in share price. Is that something that concerns us? We don't think so at all. So we have now, net of costs, about 50 million or just shy of 50 million in the bank, and we're going to execute on the business plan that we promised investors that we would. If we do that as we promised, and we execute well, we should be worth many multiples of what we are now. We're not the stock, I don't think, for people to invest and then hope to trade out of within the next few weeks or months. We are the company that you invest in and then expect to be many multiples above the price of which you enter within the next 2 or 3 years. And I think that's a really important point. I don't think we're a short-term stock, but what we are is a high-quality cannabis company with a high-quality team, a strategy that, as evidenced by GW Pharma, has worked and worked really well. And importantly, money in the bank to deliver on what we've said we are going to do.
That neatly ties into the next question, Neil, which is, how much of the company do directors own, and what are the lockups on directors' shares?
So the key directors and shareholders of the company own. Myself, Kingsley, we're at about 20%, and other directors are at about 10%. So most the shareholder base that is owned by directors is at about 40% that's locked up, and that includes, of course, Imperial Brands as well. We are locked up for a year, but speaking personally, I think this could be huge. We have every intention of looking to achieve unicorn status, and so whilst the lockup only lasts for a year, we don't anticipate selling significantly even after that.
Brilliant. John and Neil, thank you very much for that presentation on Oxford Cannabinoid Technologies. We really look forward to hearing your progress over the coming months as your drugs go through the development process. As you leave this webinar, you'll come to a short survey. It'd be really appreciated if you just could spend a couple of moments completing that survey and giving some feedback. And I just want to give some advance warning of some webinars that we've got coming up in the coming weeks. Next week, we've got on June the 15th, Oxford Biodynamics PLC. The following week, castings on June the 21st, and then going into July, on the 19th, British Land, and on the 20th, Crossword Cyber Security. And if you need any information about those webinars, please visit the Yellowstone Advisory website or email info@yellowstoneadvisory.com. Just like to say thank you for attending today's webinar, and we hope to see you all soon.